friends of Jay Slater have given evidence at his inquest today as a coroner tries to piece together exactly what happened in his final days and hours. The 19-year-old from Lancashire went missing after a night out in Tenerife. One friend told the court he didn't seem distressed when he said he was going to stay with two men he'd met. It's believed he died just hours later. Alan Jenkins has been following proceedings.
First to give evidence, Bradley Gagan in the middle here, a friend and one of the last people to speak with Jay. He told coroner Dr David James Edley that Jay had been kicked out of a club for drinking too much and had taken ecstasy and cocaine before he went missing. He said Jay told him over Snapchat he was going to stay with the two men they'd met and that he didn't seem distressed in his messages. His final contact with him a few hours later when Jay realised he was miles away from his friends in the village of Masca. Why he ended up there, the question asked to the next witness, one of the men he'd gone with that night. Speaking by video call, Ayub Kasim said Jay might have got the impression he could continue to party with them. The coroner asked him about a stolen watch Slater had referred to in Snapchat messages, Kasim saying a man had offered a fake watch to Jay, but he hadn't seen him with it. One thing I can say is Jay didn't steal no watch, he added. He told court there had been no altercation with Jay, that the teenager had insisted on getting a bus back to his resort. Another witness, Jay's friend Lucy Law, telling court she had a phone conversation with him where he said he was in the middle of mountains. He then disappeared with a huge search launched, his body found a month later. The court hearing how he'd fallen from a height into a ravine and had likely suffered a severe head injury.
So I just wanted to make another video about the Jay Slater inquest verdict, where the coroner finally concluded that Jay Slater died by accidental death falling down a ravine after 3 days of hard partying at the NRG festival in Tenerife. And so now we've finally heard from the witnesses who were the last people to speak to and see him, as the court and police were apparently unable to locate them for the original inquest back in May. But as soon as they gave evidence and it was presented on the news or social media, there was a whole load of people in the comments, even on Channel 5 News, suggesting that this was a cover-up and that Jay Slater had been murdered. And they say his death is suspicious, and they say they're seeking justice for Jay Slater and his family, even though his family had a barrister representing them at the inquest, Lois Norris, who was questioning all the witnesses. That wasn't enough for them. And these are just people in the comments. There's a whole load of channels that have thrived over spreading conspiracy theories, and some of them went as far as to email the coroner when this case literally had nothing to do with them. In his opening statement, the coroner said this death has received considerable media conjecture and speculation. This court deals only in fact. This is what can be proved and what evidence is of certain events. This is not a forum for wild conjecture and speculation. That is not appropriate in the slightest. So I had already gone over the first inquest on a previous video, where I also showed how the fake investigator, Mark Williams Thomas, flew over to Tenerife and started spreading rumours about the criminal underworld and how he was working with the family, when all he was really doing was trying to gather content for his own documentary, which, not surprisingly, didn't get the go-ahead. He was hyping up the stories about the stolen watch and the knives, which turned out to be false. At the inquest, they went over in detail how this was most likely Jay off his head and apparently owing money to his friends, bragging on Snapchat. Not one of his friends who were questioned and gave statements were able to corroborate that Jay Slater had felt threatened or was in danger at the apartment or the Airbnb of Ayub Kasim. There is literally nothing, no evidence to show that Jay Slater was in danger or was murdered. But Mark Williams Thomas doesn't want to admit he's wrong. Even in his own TikTok comments, he's saying criminal activity took place and not everyone's being honest. Young people on drugs at a festival, and people with a criminal past did not want it spread all over the news. I can't think why. A lot more has now been admitted at the inquest. Mark Williams Thomas needs to get over himself, as it had nothing to do with him. We heard from Jay's friend Brad that it was their first boys' holiday, and they might have took it a bit too far. On the night before his disappearance, he was kicked out of the venue for being so drunk he couldn't stand up, and Brad was trying to help, but they wouldn't let him back in. This explains why he messaged his friend Josh Forshaw, "They've got a marker on me," and why Josh said, "You need to get home, mate." These are the inconvenient facts or truths from the actual people that were there that these weirdos in comments and these alleged true crime content creators conveniently like to ignore, or worse, accuse them of being a liar. I've made a video on this subject and I've been on the receiving end of these comments, a lot of comments, so I think I know what I'm talking about, and I just want to explain to anyone who doesn't understand what's going on here. When that video of the second inquest was posted on the Channel 5 news channel, this account, Ordinary Citizen, was immediately all up in the comments, talking about people are going to jail, justice for Jay Slater, shushing someone for being linked to one of the suspects, except there are no suspects because there hasn't been a crime, and anyone saying otherwise is trying to manipulate you. And so when you look at this account, Ordinary Citizen, it says ordinary citizens have the power, not governments. A lot has been happening behind the scenes. The power is back in our hands. Big changes are happening. Our futures are going to be epic, I'm sure. Then there's Recovery Life, who said, "This stinks of corruption." Recovery communities seem to be a bit of a recruitment spot for troll farms. I don't know why, but it's again something I've had personal experience about that I've spoken of in previous videos. Let's just say there seems to be a lot of people struggling with addictions that spend a lot of time in comment sections, and making content using other content creators' conspiracy theories as a source is very low effort. But that's what most of the channels that have been covering Jay Slater for the past year have been doing. So they don't actually have to do their own research, and then when they get called out or found out, they start to bully and harass each other. It's just really interesting how these people would rather believe that there was a conspiracy to do away Jay Slater in one of the most inaccessible parts of the island, like so inaccessible that it took a month for his body to be found, and even every possible motive for such an act has been debunked. There was no stolen watch, and the knives pick looks like he was messing around on Snapchat. He was not part of any criminal enterprise. None of his friends, who were all speaking to him and each other at the time, thought he was in any danger. All night they've been looking out for him, and now it looks like the most logical explanation for why he went to the Airbnb was to carry on partying. And then he wanted to leave when he found out his friends were back at his own apartment drinking. He told his friend Lucy, who was a year younger than him, that he was on a mission. When their messages show, she spent most of the night trying to catch up with him and make sure he was alright. And speaking of Lucy, some of the things I've seen posted and said about her in this so-called true crime commentary community have been shameful, disgusting, misogynist, and completely unfounded. And not to mention embarrassing. It was so obvious she had nothing to do with recruiting him into a substances trafficking ring. All the girl did, and she was just a girl, 18 or 19 tops. All she did was try to keep her friends safe. She went up to look for him in the mountains. She alerted the police. Now, the problem which these content creators don't want to deal with is there's a language barrier. I bet not one of these people speaks a word of Spanish. It's standard procedure in any country. You have to wait 24 hours, if not 48, before filing a missing person report. And while it might have been frustrating, the entire Tenerife police force didn't go right out looking for him and weren't able to send a helicopter like she hoped. That is unfortunately how life works. I'm sure when she first went on Facebook or even on Sky News, she had no idea the level of attention on an international scale this was going to bring, or how much money the GoFundMe was going to raise. There's absolutely no justification for this post about her not being able to attend the court in person due to her condition, and speculating she might be pregnant by a man in his 50s. And anyone who's commented should also be ashamed. Anyone who's pretending this has anything to do with justice for Jay Slater is kidding themselves or you. This kind of content is for the sick-minded, and the family made it very clear the contempt they have for content creators when they arrived at the inquest, although they were being filmed for a documentary. Brad did speak to one content creator who was outside the court. He seemed to know his channel, JailTales, and JailTales asked Brad why Lucy wasn't there, and him and his mum Rachel said it was because she didn't feel safe.
Come in. Yeah. You alright? Yeah, what's your name? Brad, listen, just speak to me a second.
No, he's alright.
You're going to get some food. Speak to me, Brad.
Nobody. You're not allowed to speak to nobody.
Hey, Brad, just quickly, would Lucy have been safe if she had come to the meeting?
Would she been safe?
Yeah. Why is she claiming that she's not safe then?
Mate, I think something to do with
But
mental
you
health.
lot.
First time I've ever been. First time I've ever been.
You lot interrogating her.
Yeah, nice one for the follow. Watch me anyway, Brad. Appreciate it, brother. Alright, mate. Nice one.
In case you didn't catch that, he said, why doesn't she feel safe? And Brad said it was to do with her mental health. Then his mum Rachel said it's because of you lot interrogating them. And he said, well, this is the first time I've ever been. And to be fair, I don't think he's made that many videos about it. If you look at his channel profile, he says, we are looking to hopefully encourage people to not reoffend, which is interesting because it seems like everyone else in the media wants Iab, a former prisoner, to reoffend. Let's be honest, the interest in Iab was because of his criminal past, and everyone talking about the case tried to make it seem like him and his friend Rocky, who didn't turn up to the inquest, seemed guilty. But there's no evidence to show they did anything wrong. Iab genuinely seemed like he was trying to help. It also says, we appreciate that some people may not want to be filmed. And now that the inquest has been concluded with all the overriding evidence, they have gone through everything so thoroughly on this case. The witnesses have been questioned by a barrister. They've had 2 autopsies. Lancashire police have analysed all the digital data from his phone and from his watch, and all of the messages have been matched up to the timeline and made into a spreadsheet. We know every call that was made right up until the minute his phone died, and that's when he was out in the mountains, which they've released footage of to show how steep it was. And yet even after all of that, Iab showed the last known picture of Jay in the back of his car with the missing Rocky fast asleep. People are still not satisfied. When I say people, I've seen channels and posts speculating that this is a photoshopped picture, which, given they have a digital analyst specialist in the police there, seems pretty unlikely. And then there's a video of them outside the car and people are saying, oh, that's not him laughing. It is just ridiculous. I know a lot of people do not like Iab and Rocky because they're not very likable people, but trying to pin a murder on them is just not viable. Jay was seen on the road on his own, and the path he took to his death is not possible for anyone to walk. So the idea that there were 2 people with him is insane. Because how would they have survived? And then people are questioning there's a charger in the car when Iab said the charger was by Rocky's bed, as if there wasn't different types of phone chargers. And it's like, these conspiracy channels will never be satisfied. And I had deliberately not mentioned the channel names. But let's start with Wax. He has said he's not making any more videos now that the inquest is over. But I looked through his comments out of curiosity, and talk about leading him on. The amount of times I've seen people write, you're so close to the truth. So close to the truth that he stopped making videos. He must have made hundreds of videos trying to make Jay Slater's death look suspicious. That if you've watched one, you've watched them all. He never had any new information. He would go back over the same content over and over. And people are thanking him for his hard work. I would like to see just one of these channels take back some of the misinformation they've been posting, especially about Lucy. She is a young girl and these older men should know better. Suggesting she had something to hide when she probably wished they would leave her alone. And now they won't acknowledge that it's affected her mental health. Didn't Wax insinuate that IAB was running a county lines operation or something over in Tenerife, as if there isn't people over in Tenerife that are doing that. One thing I can say for sure is there is nothing truthful about his content. And I know how many of his videos have shown up on my recommended suggestions that I ended up clicking on them months ago. Months ago, I said there's no new information on this case. These channels are all going to turn on each other. And then it becomes one big troll farm. And speaking of trolls, here's Recovery Life again. He said your service to this case has been impeccably relentless. And then let's look at this guy who's begging Wax to not stop making videos. No, Wax, please don't stop making your videos about Jay. This guy has made 67 comments on his channel, and over on Duncan Smith or Ian's channel he's made over 100 comments. He's commented on the pregnancy post that you're a fantastic investigative journalist, and I don't see Ian correcting him. He's made a post out of Paris Hilton, one of the biggest internet trolls who's been fat shaming and bullying women online for years, liked his comment, and he posted it saying you're always on my mind. That is who this kind of content is feeding. That is how astroturfing and social engineering works. Rumours start off on Facebook and TikTok, and the Jay Slater missing Facebook group was how this story got so big to start with, and then it starts being made into content, and then the speculation starts as to whether people are being paid. But then there are the channels that are not monetized, who are just as bad and just as malicious, like Duncan or Ian, is it? These men are proper weird, I'm telling you, leading each other on, pretending that any official is going to take them seriously. He's over in Wax's comments saying, hats off to you, Wax. You led the way. He says, if we do end up with a coroner's recommendation for Lancs Police to conduct a criminal investigation, I'll pay for your Ryanair ticket and you can buy me a pizza. And Wax replies, deal. They would have to be seriously off their heads thinking there's going to be a criminal investigation after all the so-called research they've done. And Ian or Duncan does not give accurate information. He'll twist the story to whatever suits his narrative at the moment. He's got it in for the coroner, who, contrary to what he said, completely legitimately came back from retirement to make sure this case was concluded. And if you look at his posts, you'll see he likes to dox people, and his ignorance of how drugs dealing works is very apparent, as is this woman's understanding, and she can be found in the comments section under Ali Harris, and she actually turned up to the inquest. For some reason they're very driven personally to spread conspiracies. Duncan went and posted something about vaccines, really showed what he's about and who he's trying to appeal to, because what does anti-vax propaganda have to do with Jay Slater? And then there's this channel, so they mainly repost other people's content from TikTok without adding any commentary, which is pretty much a violation of copyright usage. And so yeah, I don't see how a coroner is going to take you seriously. But this channel also claims to have emailed the coroner, and by the way, this appears to be also a woman. It's pretty obvious that Noble is not a fan of IAB or Rocky, but the law does not respect feelings. And if they really wanted justice, they would have to put their feelings to the side and listen to the facts, and not go by what someone said on a TikTok live. And I feel like all these people interfering in the judicial process when they have nothing to do with the case is not a good idea. It will only be held against us, the public. And there was a police car waiting outside the inquest, according to Lancs Live. Actually, doxing and harassing people is considered a crime. And I know these are not the only channels still spreading rumours about Jay Slater, but they're the main ones I see keeping it going. After Luggy commented on my Mark Williams Thomas video, I went over and looked at his channel. And how are people like Lucy, for example, protected against online bullying? Because that's what it comes down to. And now that everyone has given their evidence, well, apart from Brandon and Rocky, a full timeline has been put together of Jay's movements that night, despite the fact that they were all pretty much wasted, as the judge acknowledged when he said that a common theme through this inquest had been almost all the witnesses trying to recall events after attending parties with copious amounts of alcohol and other substances, which affect perception at the time and subsequent memory. If we go back to the first inquest where Josh Forshaw said he'd drunk 10 to 15 vodka and coke, he said he had messaged Jay. We now know after he was thrown out of the club at around 2:30 for being too drunk. You need to get yourself home, lad, you're off your barnet. And that was when Jay said they had a marker on him. And then a few hours later he sends him the Snapchat about the stolen watch. DCI Higson from Lancashire Police did the digital examination of Jay's phone, the phone that was found on his body. And so she was able to see every message that was sent that we've heard about during the inquest, and she clarified timings of events. However, the coroner says that due to very good reasons, some people were blocked on social media and their messages were deleted. She said that after Jay had been separated from his friends, Lucy Law had made multiple attempts to find him and asked what he was doing. Brad was asked by the Slaters barrister why he didn't ask him about the stolen watch. And Brad said he was under the influence of drugs. And when he was first interviewed on This Morning about if he was worried about Jay, he said he'd just come out of a festival himself. He's not going to come out and say he's under the influence on This Morning now, is he? So all along the content creators were saying that Jay's friends were lying, that IAB was lying, but the digital evidence says otherwise. The coroner concluded that the Snapchats about the watches and the knives were down to social media boosting, and that his friends did not take it seriously, or they would have reacted at the time. And no watches were reported stolen, and it was a story completely blown out of proportion, which Mark Williams Thomas had a lot to do with. But Brad did say that Brandon Hodgson would have been able to say more about it. His brother was friends with IAB and was how they all knew each other, according to IAB's testimony. He possibly could have been sorting him out with gear, possibly could be called Hodge, according to the WhatsApp message that was sent to Debbie, apparently by Josh Forshaw in July 24, which said that Josh had run out of money and couldn't pay for his gear. And at the previous inquest we heard that his card had been declined on that night, so he had no money, and it explains why he couldn't get a taxi back to his apartment, which is what he wanted to do when he found out all his friends were going round there. But IAB had said he wasn't going to take him back until midday. Jay had been so drunk he couldn't stand up. He'd taken an MDMA pill. He had coke and ket in his system. And he'd been inhaling NOS gas. The balloon canisters were found in his bag. And for some reason he decided to walk home down a dangerous mountain path. Brandon had been contacted, but he did not want to show up at the inquest, and a statement that he made to Spanish police was read out. He had been one of the last people to speak to Jay, and he said he was happy and out of his mind. The Lancashire police had made several attempts to serve him with a summons, but he refused to give evidence at the inquest, which is a bit cowardly. But if we go back to when the Jay Slater case first hit the news, his mum said he had been receiving death threats due to a hate campaign, but he was actively cooperating with Spanish police. With or without his testimony, the story remains the same. Whenever there's a lack of transparency, the conspiracists will take advantage. They're going to carry on talking about this until people stop watching it. There's going to be a documentary, which I was going to wait until that came out before making another video. But according to Candor Productions and Channel 4, who are producing it, this was not only about a tragedy, but a story of a new world we live in, of online true crime armchair detectives, and the consequences of the feral, unchecked online world. So we know how that's going to go, and I'm wondering which channels were contacted to appear on this documentary, because they'll have to get permission to use people's content. IAB was told off by the coroner for trying to make a political statement at the beginning of his testimony. On a video link, he said, first and foremost, I want to send my condolences to Jay's family and what they've been through, the ones that didn't get involved in that internet drama. He then began to make references to kids dying in Palestine before he was interrupted by the coroner, who told him an inquest isn't the place for political statements. And on a serious note, the media has not given us an honest account of what's happening in Palestine. Anyone who talks about it is heavily censored online. The Jay Slater case has received so much attention and investment compared to other people, and it was a huge story in the media. They were happy to report on the conspiracy theories as long as they were getting views. They were happy to use Mark Williams Thomas as a source. But when do you ever hear them calling him out? And the media has created a space where women and black people and people with mental health issues are always the target of shame. So when drugs are involved, no one wants to talk about it, and that's when conspiracies get started. And rather than accept that they were wrong or they lied, they'll point the finger at someone else.